Jefferson Randolph Smith II, better known as Soapy Smith, was a well-known swindler and outlaw in 19th century frontier America. Born in Coweta County, Georgia in 1860, he hailed from English descent. His family had arrived in America around 1760 and settled in Virginia. However, in 1821, Jefferson's grandfather moved the family to Coweta County. The family's wealth took a hit during the Civil War, and they faced difficulties during the Reconstruction era. Seeking a better life, Jefferson's parents relocated westward to Round Rock, Texas, when he was around 16 years old in 1876. In 1878, Jefferson, along with his cousin Edwin Bobo Smith, witnessed the demise of Texas outlaw Sam Bass and his gang on July 19th. It was during this period that Jefferson was introduced to the world of deception and trickery. Around 1878, Jefferson left his family and ventured into the world of scams on his own. He traveled across the country, attending fairs, peddling inexpensive trinkets and counterfeit jewelry as a cheap John. He quickly mastered short cons like the shell game and three-card Monte. Thus, Jefferson became a seasoned confidence trickster and a rogue. Jefferson possessed a knack for organization. During his time in Fort Worth, Texas, he began assembling a group of skilled con artists known as the Soap Gang, who were highly adept at deceiving people. Each member had their own unique talents for swindling unsuspecting victims out of their money. Individually, these men had to constantly move from town to town. Jefferson brought them together, forming a cohesive organization that was more challenging to dismantle. He pooled their resources, bribed law enforcement and politicians, and hired top-notch lawyers to make it difficult for authorities to arrest and prosecute his associates. Surprisingly, Jefferson found that the existence of law and order actually worked to his advantage. According to his cousin Edwin Bobo Smith, Soapy's cons were so infamous that Fort Worth passed new laws specifically targeting his activities. Consequently, Soapy decided to seek out new opportunities elsewhere. Soapy claimed that he arrived in Denver, Colorado around 1879. He was drawn to Denver's lenient attitude towards gambling, and its inability to keep pace with its own growth made it a prime location for con artists. The Union Station train depot continuously brought in fresh targets, referred to as sheep, for the bunco gangs to exploit. Jefferson consolidated many of the scattered bunco men operating in the city into his organization, and his influence over City Hall and the police department at large expanded alongside his gang's size. By 1884, Jefferson had established himself as the kingpin of Denver's criminal underworld. Jefferson Smith had evolved from a small-time trickster traveling from place to place into a significant figure in the world of organized crime. His gang was well known and had a network of lookouts. They had around 100 individuals working for them, including people like Reverend John Bowers, who sometimes posed as a righteous clergyman, and Professor William Jackson, who pretended to be an expert in mining and minerals. For protection, they had tough gunmen like Texas Jack Vermillion, known from the days of Wyatt Earp in Tombstone, Arizona, and Big Ed Burns, the leader of a con operation in Leadville, Colorado, along with others like Sure Shot Tom Cady. Each of these individuals had their own stories of notoriety. The owners of saloons often received a cut of the money earned by the con artists for allowing them to use their establishments. Soapy and his gang spent their money freely in local stores and built relationships in the downtown areas where they operated, making them popular among many locals. Additionally, Soapy had an informal agreement with each city that they targeted. The local residents would not be targeted in their schemes. This helped maintain their reputation and support among the communities where they operated. Whenever a member of the Soap Gang needed assistance, Jefferson was quick to offer support, whether it was financial aid or legal help. The gang members grew deeply devoted to their leader. Sometimes, even the police officers on patrol sought Jefferson's assistance, especially in situations where they felt powerless. This often happened during tough economic times, when the number of people struggling financially increased. The police would reach out to the gamblers of Denver to help provide food for the poor, and Soapy's name was always among the first on the list, rarely failing to deliver. Jefferson had become so renowned for his charitable acts in Denver that even respected officials from the People's Tabernacle Church would seek his help, despite being aware of Soapy's criminal activities. Once, while giving a tour of the city, an official and his group encountered Soapy. The person then introduced Soapy as the most infamous confidence man in America and my friend. Boosters were consistently eager to lure potential victims into Soapy's rigged games by presenting them with deceptive means to win big. One such scheme was the Exchange, a sham stock market investment firm where victims invested money in a company's stock hoping for quick returns on their bet. However, the Exchange was rigged in favor of the Soap Gang, ensuring that only they profited from the scheme. Jefferson achieved considerable success in his chosen profession and decided to operate his own gambling establishments instead of paying fees to others. He established several gaming halls, one of which was the Tivoli Club located at the intersection of 17th and Market Streets. Faro and roulette were popular games at his club, with Faro being Soapy's personal favorite. He would often play until he either ran out of money or the Faro bank was depleted. To exploit a legal loophole for his shady gambling operations at the Tivoli Club, Soapy displayed a sign at the entrance that read Caveat emptor, Latin for let the buyer beware. Most likely, few of his victims ever paid attention to the warning, and even fewer could actually read Latin. In the late 1880s, Soapy's younger brother, Basco, joined his gang. Jefferson set him up in a cigar store business, which served as a front for various other swindles. In the back room, a card game was always ready for occasions when steerers from the train station brought over a potential victim to cheat. Other fraudulent businesses included fake insurance and lottery shops, auction houses offering cheap imitation watches and diamonds for bidding, and fake mining investment offices selling stocks in fictitious mining companies. Many of these establishments also featured shell games and three-card Monte to lure victims into gambling while they waited for non-existent services. The lower downtown area of Denver, particularly 17th Street between Union Station and Larimer Street, earned a reputation as the Streets of Doom. It was said that if someone could traverse this stretch without being accosted by members of the Soap Gang, they were relatively safe from financial harm. Soapy's organized crime network needed a central headquarters, so he opened an office in the Chever building at the corner of 17th and Larimer Streets to manage his operations. Victims arriving from the train station, just a few blocks away, were directed to one of Jefferson's many establishments where they could find fraudulent investment opportunities, more rigged games, or a seemingly friendly poker game but with guaranteed losses. By the time Soapy's victims left his establishments, their pockets were typically emptied of cash. This was a daily occurrence in Denver between 1883 and 1895. Jefferson Smith gained notoriety for his clever soap package scam, where unsuspecting victims were most often duped. He would set up his display on the sidewalk, pitching the virtues of soap he was selling. Jefferson claimed that some of the soap packages contained cash prizes to boost sales. He would wrap the bars of soap in plain paper, occasionally revealing bills ranging from $1 to $100, which he would then tuck inside the soap before mixing them up and offering them for sale at auction-style prices starting at $1. Unbeknownst to the crowd, among them were members of Jeff's gang, acting as accomplices. These shills were the only ones lucky enough to select soap bars containing money. And upon discovering the cash, a shill would loudly celebrate and mingle throughout the crowd, spreading the word that they had outsmarted the soap salesman. They would even offer tips on how to choose the right package. However, it was all a deception. The soap packages contained no money for anyone but Jeff's men to find. In the newspapers, Jefferson and his associates became known as the Soap Gang. Jefferson Smith, the cunning operator, then gained nationwide notoriety as Soapy Smith, a nickname that stuck with him until his death. While his friends never called him Soapy, he occasionally used the alias to intimidate his adversaries. Soapy employed the prize package soap scheme, along with the associated alias, for over 10 years, aiding in the establishment of 3 significant criminal enterprises. It's important to note that adjusted for inflation, the starting price of $1 of a soap in 1885 is equivalent to $20 today. Soapy's criminal activities became widely recognized across the western United States, especially in Denver, where the Soap Gang would caution potential victims about the numerous swindlers in the city. This tactic allowed the con artist to gain the trust of victims before ensnaring them in their own deceit. Soapy's group of con artists faced challenges from various quarters, including religious and political movements, aiming to eliminate saloons and gambling dens from the city. However, these efforts to clean up the city were often short-lived. Rival grifter organizations vied for control of the criminal underworld, employing any means necessary to overthrow Soapy. The primary rival gang is believed to have been led by brothers Sam and Lou Blonger. There were at least 2 attempts on Soapy's life. One such attempt occurred in 1889, while he was sitting in a train car at the Pocatello, Idaho depot. A detailed letter in the Smith family archives describes the ensuing gunfight between another rival gang and members of the Soap Gang. Soapy managed to shoot 2 of his attackers before escaping on horseback at full speed. Writing to his wife, he mentioned having half of his mustache shot off. Soapy reigned as the kingpin of Denver's criminal underworld from 1887 to 1895. However, in the mid-1890s, he began to lose his grip on power, partly due to his rivals, but mostly due to his own volatile temper, which led to legal troubles, ranging from minor public disturbances to attempted murder. When combined with alcohol, Soapy's temper made him a dangerous individual. His increasing notoriety for criminal activities made it impossible for local officials to continue ignoring his actions. The police and city officials were openly accused of colluding with the Bunko Gang, an accusation that was not entirely unfounded. During Denver's series of reforms in the 1880s, saloons and gamblers found themselves temporarily shut down. They often relocated to nearby towns until the reform efforts subsided, returning to Denver once the coast was clear, sometimes reopening their businesses in the same exact locations they were forced to close. In one of the more serious crackdowns in saloons and gambling in 1892, Jefferson organized his friends and associates into a sort of union and headed for the newly established silver mining camp of Creede, Colorado. Soapy cleverly secured multiple leases for storefronts along the main street in Creede, with the assistance of some women from Denver with questionable reputations. In Creede, also known as Jimtown at the time, Soapy began to establish his second criminal empire. He quickly proclaimed himself the town boss, with control over the underworld and gambling establishments dominating much of the town's commerce. Creede operated around the clock, with bright lights from the saloons and nighttime businesses reflecting off the steep canyon walls surrounding the town. Despite the apparent wildness and disorder, violent crime in Creede was relatively low compared to similar boomtowns of the era. Some historians attribute this to Soapy's control over the criminal elements, as troublemakers were swiftly dealt with. Even Bob Ford, the man who killed outlaw Jesse James, and Soap Gang member Joe Palmer, were expelled from the town after causing trouble. However, Soapy eventually facilitated their return. An assassination attempt on Soapy occurred in his saloon, the Orleans Club, leaving Soapy unharmed, but resulting in Joe Palmer losing both of his thumbs. Palmer followed Soapy to Skagway and remained there after Soapy's death, with no one aware of his connection to the Soap Gang. Back in Creede, Soapy introduced one of his more unusual schemes for gaining wealth and notoriety: McGinty, the Petrified Man. Soapy claimed to have purchased McGinty from miners who had supposedly discovered him on the outskirts of Creede. McGinty was then put on display for just 10 cents. Soapy's profits didn't come from the admission fees, though, but rather from the shell game and 3-card Monte operators who entertained the waiting crowd. A dime was all it took to see McGinty, but additional fees were charged for games played while waiting in line. McGinty stayed in Creede for a short while before being moved back to Denver. Soapy and other saloon and gambling operators received word that Denver was easing its restrictions on alcohol and gambling. Denver had suffered financially from the reforms, as many revenue-generating businesses had relocated to Creede. To lure them back, Denver had allowed them to operate freely, as they had before. Soapy's return to Denver was welcomed by city officials, as they knew he would bring back most of his associates with him. The timing was perfect for the gamblers and saloon owners to leave Creede once and for all, as the main business district of Creede was destroyed by a fire on June 5, 1892, including Soapy's Orleans Club. Although Creede attempted to rebuild, it never regained the prominence it once had when Soapy Smith was in charge. Soapy resumed operations at the Tivoli Club in Denver, continuing as if it never had been closed down at all, unfazed by recent events. The governor of Colorado, a member of the newly formed Populist Party, aimed to showcase his authority and party agenda by starting with reforms yet again in Denver. He began by dismissing 3 members of the Fire and Police Board. However, the other corrupt city officials resisted, refusing to comply with the governor's orders and prompting a showdown. Corrupt city officials barricaded City Hall against potential attack and sought aid from Soapy and the underworld. Soapy knew that a change in power might force him out of the city, so he pledged his support. Sworn in as a special deputy, Soapy, along with his men, fortified Denver City Hall and prepared for defense. Homemade dynamite bombs were prepared to deter advancing troops, while armed policemen and firemen stood ready on the lower floors. Tensions escalated as crowds gathered, anticipating conflict. The state militia arrived with artillery, including cannons and Gatling guns, positioning them in the streets outside City Hall. Orders to attack were issued and then retracted throughout the day, amid fears of civilian casualties. Eventually, cooler heads prevailed, and the standoff ended peacefully. While Soapy and his allies celebrated their victory, it was short-lived. Denver was wary of criminal influence in City Hall, leading to the eventual shutdown of gambling within city limits, though it still persisted underground. Soapy then capitalized on his deputy sheriff status by orchestrating fake raids on his own gambling establishments. These raids coincided with the moment when victims had lost their money, offering them a way out of trouble in exchange for leaving the city immediately, relinquishing their losses. As Soapy's misdeeds gained public attention, his reign of corruption began to unravel. In 1895, Soapy and his brother Bascom were involved in a violent altercation with John Hughes, a rival saloon owner, resulting in severe injuries. Bascom was arrested and sentenced to prison, while Soapy fled to avoid prosecution. Despite attempts to evade justice and support his brother's defense, Soapy ultimately became a fugitive. Although rumors circulated of his return to Denver, he remained cautious to avoid arrest. And with Soapy's departure, the Belanger brothers assumed control of Denver's criminal underworld once and for all. Eventually, Soapy embarked on his Alaskan venture in 1896, drawn by reports of burgeoning gold discoveries. Anticipating a new gold rush in the remote wilderness, he scouted for opportunities to establish his third criminal enterprise. The Klondike Gold Strike of August 1896 sent ripples across the country, though news reached the mainland only in 1897, with shipments of gold to San Francisco and Seattle. The ensuing rush brought a flood of prospectors to the closest point to the Klondike Skagway. Soapy arrived early in Skagway's development, swiftly aligning himself with local businesses and aiming to seize control, much as he had in Denver and Creede. The narrow trail to the interior, bottlenecked by stampeding prospectors, presented ideal conditions for both legitimate businessmen and con artists alike. Ships, often captained by those unfamiliar with the treacherous route, ferried passengers through perilous waters. Upon arrival, passengers and cargo were hastily unloaded to expedite the ship's return journey. Skagway, teeming with newcomers, resembled a stirred anthill, bustling with activity. A telegraph office con typically operates by preying on individuals seeking to send messages to their loved ones from a distant or remote location. In this scheme, the con artist, posing as a legitimate clerk, charges a fee for sending the messages and gathers necessary details from the unsuspecting victim. Once the message is dispatched, the victim may receive word of a reply, which the clerk offers to retrieve for an additional fee. Enticed by the promise of communication from their loved ones, the victim agrees to pay the extra charge. However, instead of delivering a genuine response, the con artist lures the victim into a rigged poker game or some other form of gambling, where they stand to lose a significant portion of their funds. By the time the victim realizes the deception, they have already suffered financial loss and are left with little recourse to recover their money. This cunning manipulation of the desire for communication exploits the vulnerability of the individuals far from home, ultimately leaving them cheated. While the telegraph office scam may seem obvious in hindsight, the urgency of reaching the goldfields often clouded judgment. Victims, eager to continue their journey, rarely pursued justice. Despite such schemes, Soapy's contributions to Skagway cannot be overlooked. He supported various charitable causes and advocated for the town's welfare, even donating funds for additional night watchmen. Operating numerous saloons, including Jefferson Smith's parlor, Soapy wielded considerable influence in Skagway. As crime escalated, residents divided into factions, with some targeting the bunco men, including Soapy, while others sided with him or remained neutral. Secret vigilante groups aimed to oust Soapy, but his cunning tactics deterred their efforts, solidifying his dominance over Skagway's underworld. The sinking of the battleship Maine in Havana Harbor in 1898 fueled a surge of patriotism across America. President McKinley called for volunteers to join the conflict against Spain. Soapy, deeply patriotic, rallied a volunteer force, naming it the Skagway Military Company. He was elected captain of the initial meeting, and correspondence, including meeting minutes, was dispatched to the Alaska governor and the U.S. president, offering the services of his army. In response, Captain Smith received official military authorization from the War Department to train his growing army at Fort St. Michael, Alaska, despite its distant location. He proudly displayed the document in Jefferson's parlor for all to see. Soapy had a clear agenda for his army: to secure his absolute authority over Skagway. With official sanction from the War Department, Soapy could impose martial law in case of any disturbances by the vigilante group known as the 101, or any other adversary to Soapy. The White Pass and Yukon Railway Company arrived in Skagway before the town's establishment, intending to lay tracks along the trail to capitalize on the gold rush. However, upon their return, they found a changed Skagway. Soapy and other business owners feared that a railroad would harm their businesses. Skagway served as a starting point for miners, who could board trains directly from the ship and bypassing much of the town. The railway had invested significantly in reaching Skagway and could not afford losses due to Soapy's opposition. The company sought a legitimate reason to remove Soapy from his position of influence, knowing he wouldn't step aside willingly. On the evening of July 8, 1898, vigilantes held a meeting on the Juneau Company wharf. Soapy, after a day filled with disputes and threats, was drinking at Jefferson Smith's parlor. A note was delivered to Soapy, urging immediate action. Angered and intoxicated, he grabbed his rifle and headed to the wharf. Some of his associates trailed behind as he approached the guards stationed on the wharf. Soapy confronted Frank Reed, one of the guards, and a dispute ensued. In the scuffle that followed, both men were shot, with Soapy ultimately losing his life. The circumstances of the gunfight remain a subject of debate, with questions surrounding who drew their weapon first, who fired first, and the number of shots exchanged. Despite conflicting accounts, Frank Reed was officially credited with Soapy's death for political reasons. Some historians suggest that Jesse Murphy, one of the other guards, was the true assailant, based on witness testimony and written accounts from the guards. Murphy reportedly wrestled Soapy's rifle away and fatally shot him with it. The decision to attribute Soapy's death to Reed was politically motivated, aiming to maintain control in Skagway amid threats of federal intervention. The circumstances surrounding Soapy's death remain shrouded in controversy, with questions about the nature of his wounds, the ownership of the bullets recovered from his body, and the possibility of foul play. Despite the uncertainty, Frank Reed was officially recognized as Soapy's killer, though historians remain divided on the matter to this day. What they don't remain divided on is Soapy Smith's unarguable legacy as one of the most colorful con men and characters of Old West lore. He was a man of charity while simultaneously being a ruthless gangster. He was an outlaw at heart and will never be forgotten as long as the American frontier is remembered.